My name is Nick Gordon, and I'm with an organization called Last Mile Health. And today I want to talk to you about how some of the most remote communities in the world use offline technology. And so as I talk about these areas, I want to frame them in the context of Liberia, a country off the coast of West Africa where we work. A few things to know about the country. It has a population of about 4.5 million, and it's had a rough couple of decades, a pair of brutal civil wars, and a recent Ebola outbreak. It's ranked as the fourth poorest country in the world, and on average, they make about 1% of what the average American citizen would make. Tragically, in remote Liberia, the mortality rate in children under 5 is 17 times higher than here in the US. And most often, they die from completely treatable diseases, malaria, diarrhea, pneumonia, or malnutrition. And largely, all of this is because it takes too long to get treatment in those areas. However, in remote areas, we've seen local community members deliver essential health services to their neighbors. They can be recruited, trained, paid, and supervised, and can ultimately deliver basic medical care to their neighbors. And that's what Last Mile Health does. We work with local governments to build the capacity of these community health professionals and build networks of them throughout a country. And that's what we're doing in Liberia. We're currently working with the Liberian Ministry of Health to create a network of 4,000 health workers in the country, supported by 400 nurse supervisors, ultimately serving a population of 1.2 million of some of the most disconnected people in the country. To give you a sense of what we mean when we say last mile, I want to take you to a place called Ziagbe, one of our more remote communities. There's only 197 people living in 34 different houses. It does not have any access to nearby cellular network, and it's 67 kilometers away from the nearest health facility. And most of that road is not traversable by motorbike or by vehicle. On foot, it would take about 13 and a half hours for you to reach that health facility. Sorry, could we go to slide 4? 2 more. Perfect. Where we work, it's no easy walking. It's dense jungle, and imagine how challenging that 2-day walk might be if you were pregnant or crippled or you had malaria. And as we've seen today, it's obviously not just Liberia with these kind of remote last-mile conditions. From Zambia to rural Vietnam, as we saw today, Peru, to rural America, like the North Slope in Alaska. These kind of last-mile communities exist on every continent in the world. And each one of them comes with a completely unique set of logistical challenges. And it was around these kind of challenges that we started thinking, how can we extend technology to these last-mile communities? So the first thing we started with what I think is the most obvious approach. Why not just expand the network? Make the internet bigger, build more cell towers, build taller cell towers, just start getting more of these communities to pop up online. And that was our first approach. In 2012, we worked with a local network provider to build a cell tower in Ziatown, one of our first areas of operations. And just as you might expect, it completely transformed how we worked there. We were able to communicate much more effectively with those health workers. But that network still didn't reach far enough, and the neighboring communities were still, and still are, completely disconnected. Plus, Ziatown had a population of 2,500 people, and remember, Ziagbe had less than 200. There's no incentive for a cellular network provider no commercial incentive for them to install or maintain a cell tower in these very, very small communities. So the next thing we tried was to just expand the services. The health services, there's less need to communicate if those trained providers are much are in much closer proximity to the patients. And that's actually how we approach the challenges in Ziagbe. We simply worked with the Grand Jeddah County Health Team to build a health facility much closer to those communities. But like expanding a network, this benefited a limited geographic scope, and we weren't able to extend new and innovative technologies, nor were we able to extend other services like education. So in 2015, towards the tail end of the Ebola epidemic, we introduced a digital health initiative, which equipped our community health workers with a small solar panel, a battery pack, and a low-cost Android smartphone. And on that smartphone, we put an Ebola screening tool, a tool for diagnosing and treating diarrhea and pneumonia and malaria. Some of the apps that we might take for granted, like a stopwatch or flashlight, that are actually very useful for in diagnosing and treating. And health videos. And our tests with this initiative were incredibly promising, and we had more data on our patients and how they're being treated than we'd ever had before. But we still ran into this last mile problem where we didn't have good mechanisms for transferring data to or from our health workers. I don't know if any of you out there watch a show called Silicon Valley. There's this episode in season 1 where all these tech CEOs are at a conference and they are talking about how their platform and their technology is going to absolutely revolutionize the world with things like software-defined data centers for cloud computing to make the world a better place, or scalable, fault-tolerant distributed databases to make the world a better place. So at Last Mile Health, we have something like that, which we call offline bidirectional data transfer protocols to make the world a better place. So bear with me, I do want to take a few seconds to dig into some of the technical details about how we communicate with our community health workers who don't have any access to the internet. So the first thing we do is, or the first thing we need to do is pull that information, that health information, off of the smartphone and into a centralized database, into the hands of health managers and decision makers. So to do that, during routine supervision visits, a supervisor who is also equipped with an Android phone, that health data is transferred completely offline and over Bluetooth to that supervisor's phone. That supervisor can then transfer it on to another supervisor, or ultimately, once a user becomes in range of internet access, they can upload that information into a central database. But the bidirectional part speaks to the need to transfer information back to our community health workers. So let's say we develop a new treatment protocol and need to update forms. Or let's say our monitoring and evaluation team identifies an abnormally high incorrect diarrhea treatment rate. We need mechanisms to transfer forms, or new forms, and targeted education material back to those community health workers. And in this instance, that process works in reverse, where the supervisor will have the latest information from that centralized database that they can send back to a community health worker, again, completely offline. Over the last year, we've also been working on a digital education initiative called the Community Health Academy. And there's two major components to that initiative. It's a global training platform to connect health systems leaders and community health workers across the world. So the first part, which unfortunately I don't have time to talk about today, is a collaboration with Harvard X. We're bringing together some of the most renowned people in this community health workspace to create the next generation of global health leaders. But today I want to highlight the other part of that initiative, which is specifically targeting digital education towards community health workers. Well, some of the benefits of this is, first, it allows our community health workers to actually bring these forms and reference materials into the field and when they go and visit patients. In Liberia, about all the text and form books, it amounts to about 2 textbooks worth of paper materials. Since many of our health workers are also illiterate or semi-literate, pushing this content into multimedia allows them to consume and understand this content better and faster than they were ever able to before. And this initiative also creates very big data sets on training, which in itself is really cool if these are the things you think are cool. But the real potential of this is to take those big training data sets and combine them with the big training data sets that our community health workers are generating while diagnosing and treating patients. By triangulating these two, we are going to be able to have a much more nuanced look into the quality of the program, to the knowledge and skills acquisition, and how those are actually making an impact directly on patients' lives. We're tremendously excited about where this initiative is taking us. Finally, we've been told again and again that last-mile communities are too difficult to reach, too challenging to serve. Things like the return on investment simply isn't great enough to justify treating people in communities that remote. I believe those attitudes to be dangerous. And the switch point that I want to leave you with today is simply a greater awareness of the challenges that these communities face and how much of our world lives in settings that are so disconnected from essential and life-saving technologies and services. And I know this hall is absolutely packed with amazing thinkers and innovators and problem solvers. And as we wrap up this conference today, and you get back to your innovating and your problem solving, I just hope that you consider if your innovation or your art or your technology will be able to reach people living in last-mile communities. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to present to you today. Thank you so much for your time.